Jake wiped the sweat off his brow as he leaned against the old wooden fence that bordered his sprawling farm. Summer had finally settled over the valley, and the sweet smell of freshly mown hay mixed with the faint aroma of sizzling barbecue from the grill. This was Jake's favorite day of the year, the annual farm BBQ, a tradition he'd started years ago to bring together neighbors, friends, and family for a day of laughter, food, and freedom. This year felt different though. The past week had been filled with strange little signs. First, a plastic lawn flamingo, something Jake never liked, appeared on his porch, facing the house like a silent sentinel. Then, just this morning, he spotted a black SUV parked across the road. It was empty when he approached, but the tinted windows didn't hide the uneasy feeling curling in his gut. Now, as Jake opened his mailbox to check for any last-minute supplies, a folded note slipped from the slot, landing softly on the wooden floor of the mailbox. Curious, he unfolded the paper. No signature, no return address, just a chilling message written in neat, typed letters. Unwelcome guests are coming. Be prepared. The HOA is watching. Jake's brow furrowed. The HOA? That didn't make sense. His farm was well outside the boundaries of any homeowners association. He had purposely chosen this plot of land to escape the suffocating rules and endless fees of the nearby HOA communities. Why would they be interested in his BBQ? His mind raced. Was this some kind of prank? Or worse, a warning? His phone buzzed suddenly, jolting him from his thoughts. A text from Lisa, his neighbor across the street. Karen's been asking about your BBQ. She says she might stop by, Karen. Jake's stomach sank. Karen was infamous in the neighboring HOA community. The relentless, self-appointed enforcer of rules. The kind of person who never missed an opportunity to police the smallest infraction. Noise too loud. Parking in the wrong spot. Leaf out of place. Karen was there with her clipboard and stern voice. The thought of Karen showing up uninvited made Jake uneasy. He had always kept a polite distance from the HOA crowd. His BBQ was a free-spirited event, a little sanctuary from the rigid, suffocating rules that Karen represented. He'd never invited her or anyone from the HOA. The sun dipped lower behind the hills as Jake prepared the last of the picnic tables. He tried to shake the uneasy feeling, but couldn't ignore the shadow of anticipation hanging in the air. He double-checked the guest list. All familiar faces, none from the HOA. As the first guests began arriving, kids running barefoot through the fields, neighbors carrying baskets of food. Jake scanned the horizon. The black SUV was gone, but the sense of being watched remained. Suddenly, the sound of a car crunching down the gravel driveway made Jake freeze. He turned slowly, and there she was, Karen. Dressed in her usual crisp white blouse and sharp slacks, holding her infamous clipboard like a badge of honor, she stepped through the farm gate with a determined stride. Jake, she called out, her voice sharp and official. I'm here to discuss some concerns about your event. The crowd fell silent, eyes darting between Jake and Karen. A ripple of tension raced through the gathering. The peaceful afternoon suddenly thick with uncertainty. Jake took a deep breath. This BBQ was supposed to be a celebration, but now the mysterious note and Karen's unexpected arrival made one thing painfully clear. This year's farm BBQ was about to become more than just a friendly get-together. It was about to turn into a battle for freedom, and no one knew how it would end. Karen's heels clicked sharply on the gravel driveway as she marched toward Jake. Clipboard clutched firmly in one hand, like a weapon. The sun, now low in the sky, cast long shadows across the farm. making the tension between them feel even thicker, heavier. Jake watched her approach, feeling a swirl of confusion and irritation. "Karen?" he said cautiously, forcing a polite smile. "What brings you here? I didn't realize the HOA was involved with my farm." Karen stopped just a few feet away, eyes cold and calculating. "That's precisely why I'm here," she replied, voice tight with authority. "There are several violations happening here today. Noise levels exceeding community limits, unauthorized parking along the roadside, and what looks like a temporary structure that doesn't comply with HOA regulations." Jake blinked, disbelief flashing across his face. "Karen, my farm is not part of your HOA. You have no jurisdiction here." Karen's lips tightened into a thin line. "I've been informed that this event is causing disturbances to the neighbors in the area. Whether or not your property falls within the HOA boundaries, we're concerned about the impact." A murmur rose from the crowd gathering nearby. Neighbors, who had come for a relaxed afternoon, were now watching the confrontation unfold. Some whispered among themselves. Others exchanged curious glances. "Disturbances?" Jake repeated, trying to keep his tone steady. "We've been doing this BBQ every year for nearly a decade without a single complaint. It's a peaceful event, and I make sure everything is cleaned up afterward. I'm not sure what you're basing these claims on." Karen glanced at her clipboard, flipping through several pages, as if searching for a justification. "There have been complaints. Multiple neighbors have contacted the HOA about this event. It's my duty to investigate and enforce compliance." Jake took a deep breath, feeling the eyes of his friends and neighbors on him. He wasn't about to let Karen turn his BBQ into a battleground. "Look, Karen," he said firmly, "I respect the rules in your neighborhood, but this farm is not governed by the HOA. I'm not required to answer to you or follow your community's restrictions." Karen's eyes narrowed. "That may be true legally, but you're still part of this community. We all share this space, and your actions affect us." Jake's jaw clenched. "Karen, with all due respect, I didn't invite you here. This is private property, and I welcome anyone who respects that." At that moment, Karen pulled out her phone and started snapping pictures of the BBQ setup. Tables loaded with food, kids running around, a makeshift canopy that she insisted was illegal. "Stop that," Jake said sharply. "You're trespassing. If you want to take photos, do it from the public road." Karen's gaze hardened. "I'm documenting violations for the HOA board. This isn't personal, Jake. It's about protecting the community." Jake's hands curled into fists. The friendly gathering had dissolved into a standoff, and Karen's presence felt like a threat hanging over everyone. Suddenly a voice rose from the crowd. "Karen, why don't you just leave the man alone? He's not in the HOA, and he's been nothing but a good neighbor." A middle-aged woman named Susan stepped forward, her tone calm but firm. A few others nodded in agreement, their support breaking the uneasy silence. Karen hesitated, her smile tight and forced. "I have my orders. This event cannot continue without proper approvals." Jake met her gaze steadily. "Then you're going to have to explain that to the sheriff, because I'm not stopping my BBQ." The tension between them was palpable. Every neighbor caught in the middle, waiting for the next move. Karen's eyes flicked to the crowd, then back to Jake. Without another word, she turned sharply and marched back to her car, leaving behind a trail of whispered speculations and lingering unease. Jake exhaled slowly, trying to shake off the confrontation, but deep down, he knew this was only the beginning. Karen's visit had changed everything. The farm was no longer just a place of freedom and celebration. It had become a battleground where rules, power, and community clashed in ways no one had expected. and as the sun dipped below the horizon, the neighbors left with more questions than answers. The night settled over Jake's farm like a thick, restless blanket. The laughter and music from the BBQ faded into memory as Jake sat alone on the porch, staring out at the dark fields. Karen's visit lingered in his mind like a shadow that refused to lift. The unease that had crept in earlier now gnawed at his thoughts with relentless persistence. He knew Karen wasn't just a lone troublemaker. She represented something bigger. A rigid system, determined to control, to regulate, to fence in freedom. But Jake's farm was his sanctuary. A place where rules were few, and the land was free. The following morning, a bright summer sun did little to ease the tension. Jake was already up early, pacing the yard when his phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from the HOA president himself. An invitation, or more accurately, a summons, to a community hearing scheduled for the next week. The subject, Jake's farm BBQ and alleged violations. Jake's jaw tightened as he read the message. The HOA was serious. More serious than he had anticipated. They weren't going to let this go. Determined to prepare, Jake began gathering paperwork, maps proving his property boundaries, previous correspondence showing no HOA affiliation, and photos of past BBQs with no complaints. But deep down, he knew that evidence might not be enough against the weight of HOA politics and Karen's determination. Later that afternoon, as neighbors arrived at the farm once again for a small gathering, Karen returned, but this time, she wasn't alone. Flanked by two stern-faced HOA board members, Karen carried an air of authority that made the crowd stiffen. "Jake," she began, her voice colder than before, "we need to discuss your non-compliance with community standards. This isn't a friendly chat anymore." Jake met her gaze steadily. "Karen, my farm isn't part of your HOA. I'm not subject to your community standards." Karen's eyes glinted with something harder. A kind of steel that warned Jake this wasn't just about rules anymore. "You may think that, but your activities affect our community. The noise, the traffic, the structures. We have residents who feel disturbed and unsafe." Jake's lips curled into a bitter smile. "Disturbed? Unsafe? They come here for a day of peace, laughter, and good food. No one has complained to me directly. And the structures are temporary tents I put up myself. I follow every local law." Karen's clipboard went down, her patience thinning. "This isn't just about the law, Jake. It's about community harmony and respect. If you won't comply voluntarily, we'll have no choice but to take legal action." A ripple of murmurs ran through the crowd, some worried, others defiant. Jake squared his shoulders. "Go ahead, but I won't back down." The standoff seemed poised to explode when suddenly a loud bark shattered the tension. A large dog barreled through the crowd, tail wagging wildly, breaking the heavy atmosphere with a moment of innocent chaos. The neighbors laughed, the mood lightened, but the underlying conflict remained unshaken. That night, Jake sat by the fire pit with his closest friends, voices low and serious. They debated the next move. Some urged caution, warning Jake that the HOA's power was formidable and persistent. Others insisted he fight, not just for his BBQ, but for the principle of freedom from overreach. The days that followed brought more subtle signs of pressure. Flyers posted near the community mailbox hinted at HOA meetings to address nuisance properties. Anonymous calls to local authorities questioned the legality of Jake's events. Karen's presence seemed to hover like a dark cloud over the farm. Jake felt the walls closing in. But with every challenge, his resolve grew stronger. This wasn't just about a BBQ anymore. It was about standing up for what he believed in. As the date of the HOA hearing approached, the community's divisions deepened. Some neighbors sided with the HOA's desire for order. The others quietly rallied behind Jake's fight for independence. The farm had become a symbol, a beacon of resistance against the tightening grip of control. And when the day of the hearing finally arrived, the entire neighborhood held its breath, waiting to see which side would prevail. The morning of the HOA hearing dawned gray and heavy with anticipation. Jake stood outside his farmhouse, the weight of the coming confrontation pressing down on him like the thick clouds overhead. The farm, usually a sanctuary of peace and open skies, now felt charged with tension, a battleground awaiting its first salvo. Word had spread fast. The small community surrounding Jake's farm was now split, a fracture line drawn between those loyal to the HOA's strict order and those quietly rooting for Jake's independence. As neighbors began gathering at the local community center, where the hearing was scheduled, the air buzzed with whispered conversations and exchanged glances. Some wore expressions of concern, others thinly veiled excitement. The crowd was a tapestry of divided loyalties. Longtime HOA members who valued their neighborhood's rules, and newer residents intrigued by Jake's stand. Jake arrived early, clutching his folder of maps, photos, and documents. His eyes scanned the room, landing on familiar faces. Susan, who had spoken up in his defense at the BBQ, gave him a reassuring nod. Nearby, a group of HOA board members huddled, their postures stiff and determined. The hearing began with formalities. The HOA president outlining the concerns raised about Jake's farm, BBQ, noise complaints, unauthorized structures, and traffic's congestion. Karen, seated prominently, presented her report with clinical precision, her voice cutting through the room like a blade. Jake listened, each word fueling his determination. When it was his turn, he stood and spoke clearly, his voice steady, despite the knot tightening in his stomach. "My farm is not part of the HOA," he began. "I've lived here for years, outside your jurisdiction, and I've always respected local laws. The BBQ is a community event, a place where neighbors come together in friendship, not conflict. There have been no direct complaints to me, only vague accusations." He laid out his evidence, property maps showing clear boundaries, past correspondence with local authorities, confirming his exemption, and photos of previous BBQs where guests parked responsibly, and noise was kept at a respectful level. Still, Karen interrupted sharply. The impact on the community cannot be ignored. Whether or not Mr. Jake's property is technically outside the HOA, the noise and traffic affect everyone's quality of life. Murmurs echoed around the room. Some nodded in agreement, but others exchanged skeptical looks. Susan stood next, her voice calm but firm. "We all want a peaceful community, yes, but we also want fairness. Jake has been a good neighbor, and his BBQ brings us together. Isn't that worth something?" The room grew quiet, tension crackling in the silence. As the hearing stretched on, subtle divisions deepened. A few younger neighbors spoke cautiously, sympathetic to Jake's desire for freedom. Others, older and more entrenched in HOA life, sided with Karen's calls for order. Outside, the community center's windows fogged with the breath of neighbors, waiting anxiously. Rumors had spread that some residents were considering pushing to redraw HOA boundaries to include Jake's farm, a move that would bring his property under their control permanently. The thought sent a ripple of unease through Jake. He realized the fight was bigger than one BBQ, or even one property. It was a battle over power, control, and identity. After hours of tense discussion, the hearing recessed with no clear resolution. The HOA board promised to review the evidence and revisit the matter soon. But as the crowd filtered out, the underlying fractures remained raw and unresolved. On his way home, Jake noticed groups of neighbors, whispering in doorways and over fences. Some avoided his gaze. Others gave subtle nods of support. The community was no longer united. It had become a chessboard, with pawns and kings moving cautiously. That night, Jake sat by the fire pit, the glow flickering over his thoughtful face. His closest friends gathered around, voices low but urgent. "We can't let them take this from us," one friend said. "It's not just about the BBQ anymore. It's about who gets to say what happens here." Jake nodded, eyes fixed on the flames. "This fight isn't just mine. It's ours, and it's only just begun." Outside, a cool wind stirred the leaves, carrying the whispers of neighbors, torn between loyalty and freedom. The farm stood silent under the night sky, a quiet fortress bracing for the storm ahead. The sun rose on a new day, but Jake's farm felt anything but peaceful. The quiet countryside had been replaced by the relentless hum of smartphones and social media notifications. The conflict that had started at the BBQ was now spreading through the virtual world, a battlefield Jake hadn't anticipated. It began with a post on the HOA's official Facebook page. A sharp, pointed message from Karen, complete with photos of Jake's BBQ setup. The images highlighted the violations she had documented. The tents, the parked cars spilling onto the roadside, and the crowd gathered well into the evening. The caption read, "Community members deserve respect and peace. Unregulated. Events like this disrupt our neighborhood. The HOA will continue to enforce standards for everyone's safety and comfort." The post instantly ignited a firestorm of comments. Some HOA residents applauded Karen's vigilance, praising her for standing up to what they called a nuisance. Others condemned her as a bully, accusing the HOA of overreach and harassment. Jake watched the escalating thread with a mixture of frustration and disbelief. This wasn't just about a BBQ anymore. It was a public spectacle, with sides forming and opinions hardening. Determined to fight back, Jake decided to livestream his next event. With his phone perched on a tripod, he broadcast the sights and sounds of the farm. The children laughing as they chased chickens, friends sharing stories around picnic tables, the smell of grilled ribs and corn on the cob wafting through the warm air. As the livestream reached hundreds of viewers, supportive comments flooded in. People from neighboring towns, even strangers online, cheered Jake's stand for freedom and community spirit. The contrast was stark. The warmth of the farm against the cold, rigid posts of the HOA page. But Karen wasn't done. She launched a counter-campaign, urging neighbors to report violations and warning that uncontrolled gatherings could lead to fines and legal action. The tension spilled into private messages, with some neighbors privately expressing fear of retaliation if they supported Jake openly. The digital divide in the community became a mirror of the growing real-world rift. Facebook groups, text chains, and neighborhood forums buzzed with debates, accusations, and threats. Jake's phone rarely stopped buzzing with messages, some offering help, others demanding he back down. Late one evening, as Jake scrolled through the comments, a private message caught his eye. It was from an unknown number, terse and cryptic. "Watch your back. Not everyone here wants peace." His heart quickened. The battle was no longer just about HOA rules or BBQs. Darker forces seemed to be at play, and Jake was smack in the middle. Still, He refused to be intimidated. He posted a new video the next day, walking viewers through his property lines, explaining his legal status outside the HOA, and inviting everyone to join his next gathering. A peaceful celebration of independence. The video went viral locally, sparking renewed support and rallying new allies. But it also deepened Karen's resolve, and the HOA doubled down on its efforts to clamp down. The farm had become ground zero in a digital war of wills, one where the stakes were more than just property lines. It was about community, control, and the right to live freely. As night fell over the valley, Jake stared at the glowing screen, feeling the weight of both hope and threat. The fight was no longer just face-to-face. It was a war fought in pixels and posts, likes and shares. And Jake knew the next move would determine not just the fate of his BBQ, but the soul of the entire neighborhood. Jake sat at his kitchen table, the glow of his laptop casting sharp shadows across his face. The digital war with the HOA had escalated beyond anything he'd imagined. Every notification felt like a volley fired in a battle he never asked to fight. The message from the unknown number, "Watch your back, not everyone here wants peace," still echoed ominously in his mind. His friends rallied around him, but Jake sensed the fight was wearing on them all. The community seemed split in two, and even some longtime neighbors had started to avoid him, wary of taking sides. Just as the weight of isolation pressed down, an unexpected knock came at the door. Jake opened it to find a woman standing there, a new face in the neighborhood. She was mid-30s, with a calm confidence and eyes that seemed to miss nothing. "Hi, I'm Emily," she said, holding out a hand. "I moved here recently. I've been watching the situation unfold, and I want to help." Jake blinked, surprised but grateful. "Thanks, Emily. I could use an ally right now." Emily stepped inside and quickly explained her background. A former community organizer with experience navigating HOA politics and grassroots activism, she understood how these power dynamics worked and had a network of contacts that might shift the tide. Over the next few days, Emily and Jake worked quietly but strategically. She helped Jake draft clear, fact-based communications that framed his BBQ as a positive community event, emphasizing openness, respect, and legal standing outside the HOA's authority. She also suggested they hold a community freedom fest, a public event inviting neighbors, local officials, and media to celebrate independent living and push back against overreach. The plan ignited hope, but also fear. Karen's presence seemed to darken every step forward. On the day they began preparing the farm for the Freedom Fest, a vandal left threatening graffiti on the fence. "Stay in line or pay the price." Jake's jaw clenched. Emily's steady voice cut through his anger. "This means they're scared. Scared of what you represent." The festival day arrived, with perfect blue skies and a buzz of excitement. Flyers circulated, social media posts invited everyone, and local reporters showed interest. As the crowd grew, Jake scanned the faces, some familiar, some hesitant. Karen was nowhere to be seen, but her absence didn't mean she wasn't watching. The event was a mix of laughter, music, and speeches about rights and community spirit. Neighbors shared food, children played, and the tension of recent weeks seemed to ease. If only for a moment, Emily took the microphone and spoke eloquently about respect, freedom, and finding common ground. Just as the sun began to set, a commotion stirred near the edge of the crowd. A group of HOA members had arrived unexpectedly, led by Karen herself. The atmosphere shifted instantly. The peaceful gathering bristled with nervous energy. Karen stepped forward, voice loud and sharp. This event is unauthorized and disruptive. I'm here to remind everyone that rules exist for a reason. Jake met her gaze evenly. We're here peacefully, Karen. This is about community. Something you seem to have forgotten. The crowd murmured, divided between support and unease. Suddenly, a surprising voice cut through the tension. One of the HOA board members, a usually stern man named Mr. Caldwell, raised his hand. I've been thinking, he said slowly. Maybe this fight isn't about dividing us. Maybe it's about learning to live together, respecting each other's spaces and freedoms. The words hung in the air, a fragile bridge over a widening chasm. Karen's face tightened, but for a moment, the hard edges softened. Jake realized the battle had shifted from confrontation to negotiation, and with Emily's unexpected help, maybe there was a chance for something better. But deep down, Jake knew the road ahead was still uncertain, and the real challenge was just beginning. The weeks after the Community Freedom Fest felt like walking a tightrope. Jake's farm had become a focal point, not just for neighbors, but for everyone invested in the unfolding drama. The farm was no longer merely a place for BBQs. It was a symbol of defiance and dialogue. After Emily's surprising intervention at the festival, the HOA's rigid front began to crack. Some board members started quietly reaching out to Jake, suggesting meetings and discussions to find compromise. The tone shifted from confrontation to cautious negotiation, but the tension simmered beneath every exchange. One evening, Jake received an invitation to a private meeting with the HOA president and a few key board members, including Karen. The location was the community clubhouse, neutral ground, far from the wide openness of the farm. Jake hesitated. Was this a trap? Another attempt to intimidate him? But Emily's voice urged caution and hope. This is your chance to shape the outcome, she said. Don't let fear rule you. The meeting room was stark and formal, a far cry from the warmth of Jake's farm. Karen sat across from him, arms folded, eyes sharp as ever. But the tension had changed. It wasn't just hostility now. It was calculation and something closer to respect. The HOA president spoke first, acknowledging the division the conflict had caused. We want to find a path forward that respects both community standards and individual freedoms. Jake listened, heart pounding. Then Karen spoke, her voice softer but firm. We can't ignore the concerns of residents who feel disturbed by the events on your property. But I realize the farm is your home, your sanctuary. Maybe there's a middle ground. Jake leaned forward. What do you suggest? Karen outlined a proposal. Jake would limit the size and frequency of his gatherings and commit to certain noise restrictions and parking arrangements. In return, the HOA would formally recognize the boundaries, excluding his property from their jurisdiction, and drop any pending complaints. It wasn't perfect. Compromises never are. But it was progress. Emily nodded approvingly. It shows respect for everyone's needs. The conversation turned to details. Times for events, communication channels, and mutual respect. But just as things seemed on track, Karen paused, her gaze locking with Jake's. There's one more thing, she said quietly. We want you to help us rebuild trust in the community. That means involving neighbors in your events, being transparent, and helping mediate tensions. Jake considered the weight of that request. Could he? Should he? He realized that winning the fight wasn't just about holding his ground. It was about building bridges. When the meeting ended, Jake felt a cautious optimism. The battle had shifted from war to negotiation. But that night, as he sat on his porch, staring at the stars, a new message popped on his phone. This isn't over. Watch the shadows. The fight for freedom wasn't finished, but now Jake had allies, a plan, and a chance to rewrite the rules. And he wasn't backing down. The morning after the tense meeting, Jake woke up with a strange mix of exhaustion and determination. The weight of the conflict had pressed down on him like a storm, but for the first time, he felt the storm beginning to break. For weeks, the battle with the HOA had seemed endless. A clash of wills, rules, and power. But now, something had shifted. He had an unexpected ally in Emily, tentative cooperation with some board members, and a plan that could bring peace without sacrificing his freedom. That day, Jake decided to prepare for what he knew would be a final showdown. The next big HOA board meeting where the proposal would be voted on. He expected tension, drama, and maybe even sabotage. But what he didn't expect was Karen showing up at his farm, unannounced again. This time, she wasn't armed with warnings or complaints. She carried a box of freshly baked cookies and a forced smile. Jake raised an eyebrow. "What's this?" Karen glanced nervously around, then said, "I wanted to talk, really talk, away from the politics, the posts, the tension." Jake was skeptical, but invited her in. They sat on the porch, the sun casting long shadows over the farm. Karen took a deep breath. "I've been so focused on the rules that I forgot what this is really about," she admitted. "Community, respect. Maybe your BBQ wasn't the problem. Maybe it was just a reminder that we're losing sight of what neighbors are for." Jake laughed softly. "So the tough HOA enforcer has a soft side." Karen smiled, a little embarrassed. "Maybe. Look, I'm sorry for showing up uninvited and making a mess of things." Jake shook his head. "It's okay. I get it. You were just doing your job." She hesitated, then said, "But here's the thing. The joke's on you." Jake blinked. "What?" Karen chuckled. "You're not in the HOA, true. But when you started this fight, you reminded us what it feels like to have control taken away, even if it's by the people we trust to protect our neighborhood. You shook things up, and now we're all thinking differently." Jake grinned. "So the BBQ wasn't just about food and friends." "No," Karen said. "It was about freedom, about standing up for what's right. You made us question who we are as a community." They sat quietly, the tension between them dissolving into something unexpected. Respect. Later that week, the HOA board meeting unfolded differently than anyone expected. The proposal was accepted, with conditions that balanced community harmony and individual freedoms. The complaints were dropped. The farm's boundaries were officially recognized as outside the HOA's jurisdiction, with mutual agreements on noise and event management. Neighbors who had once been divided began to reconnect, inspired by the peaceful resolution and the farm's example. Jake's Farm BBQ became a regular tradition, a symbol not just of food and fun, but of courage and community spirit. As for Karen, she became a surprising advocate for compromise, showing that even the fiercest opponents can change. And Jake? He kept grilling, laughing, and living free, with the joke very much on Karen, who had underestimated the power of a BBQ and the man who refused to be boxed in.